I'm 52 years old, and I've been living in a cave system on the Oregon coast for the past 5 years. My wife Rebecca is here. Our daughter Emma, who was 14 when we arrived, is now 19. Our son Michael, who was 11, just turned 16. We came here in July 2019 for a 3-day kayaking trip. We never left. I'm not writing this because I want attention. I'm writing it because Rebecca doesn't speak in full sentences anymore, and Michael has started humming at night in a way that terrifies me. Someone needs to know what happened to us. Someone needs to understand why we can't leave, and why no one should ever come looking for us. The locals call this place the Mermaids grottos. It's a network of sea caves carved into the basalt cliffs about 40 miles south of Newport. The caves aren't on any official maps. You can only access them by water during low tide, and most kayakers avoid them because of the currents. We found them by accident, following a pod of harbor seals that disappeared into what looked like a solid rock face. My name is David Chen. Before this, I was a high school physics teacher in Portland. Rebecca taught piano lessons from our home. We were ordinary people leading an ordinary life. Every summer, we'd take the kids somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, camping, hiking, exploring. That July, we'd rented kayaks and yachts and planned to paddle the coastline for a few days, camping at designated beach sites. The caves appeared on our second day out. The morning had been overcast, typical for the Oregon coast in summer. We'd paddled maybe 8 miles from our launch point when Emma spotted the seals. She'd always loved marine mammals, kept a notebook of every species she'd seen. She wanted to follow them, get photographs. I should have said no. The entrance was narrow, maybe 6 feet across at the waterline. The seals slipped through easily. I went first, ducking my head as the kayak glided into shadow. The passage opened after about 20 feet, widening into a cavern the size of a small gymnasium. Daylight filtered through cracks in the rock ceiling, creating pools of pale blue illumination in the darkness. The walls were black basalt, smooth from centuries of water erosion. The cave continued deeper into the cliff, branching into multiple passages. The tide was low, exposing a rocky shelf that would make a perfect campsite. The acoustics were strange. Every small sound echoed and multiplied, and the waves outside created a constant background noise that sounded almost musical. Rebecca paddled in behind me, then the kids. We floated there for a moment, letting our eyes adjust. Michael said it looked like a cathedral. Emma was already taking pictures with her waterproof camera. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. We explored for an hour, paddling into the different passages, shining our flashlights on the rock formations. Some tunnels were too narrow to navigate. Others opened into smaller chambers with tidal pools full of starfish and anemones. One passage led to a cavern where the ceiling had partially collapsed, creating a natural skylight. We could see the forest above through the opening. Rebecca suggested we camp here for the night instead of paddling to the designated beach site 3 miles south. The kids were excited. I checked the tide chart on my phone. I still had 1 bar of signal near the entrance. High tide would come in around 10 p.m., but the shelf we'd identified sat well above the tide line. We'd be safe. We set up our tents on the rocky platform, maybe 200 feet from the cave entrance. The shelf was dry, relatively flat. We'd brought sleeping bags, a camp stove, food for 5 days. By late afternoon, we had camp established. The kids explored the tidal pools while Rebecca and I organized our supplies. That's when we first heard it. The sun was setting outside, and the light inside the cave had faded to a deep blue twilight. I was filtering water from one of the tidal pools. Fresh water seeped through cracks in some of the rocks, mixing with the salt water below. The sound started softly, almost imperceptible beneath the constant noise of the waves, singing. Not human singing exactly, but close. Wordless vocalizations that rose and fell in patterns that felt deliberate, musical. The sound seemed to come from deeper in the cave system, from the passages we hadn't fully explored. Rebecca heard it too. She stopped unpacking and tilted her head, listening. Emma called out from one of the tidal pools. She asked if we heard music. Michael said it sounded like people singing underwater. The sound grew slightly louder as darkness fell outside. Not loud enough to be alarming, just present. Constant. like wind through trees, but more structured. I told myself it was the waves, the way sound traveled through the rock. Acoustics in caves can create strange effects. I'd read about places where wind through narrow passages creates tones that sound almost like instruments. This had to be something similar. We ate dinner by lantern light. The singing continued, sometimes fading to almost nothing, sometimes swelling to where we could hear distinct harmonies, multiple voices, if they were voices. The kids seemed unsettled but not frightened. Rebecca kept pausing between bites, listening. Michael asked what was making that sound. I explained about cave acoustics, about how water and wind and rock formations can create unexpected noises. He seemed satisfied with that explanation. Emma asked if we could explore the deeper passages tomorrow with better lights. I said maybe. We stayed up later than usual, talking by the lanterns. The singing became part of the background, almost comfortable in its consistency. Around 10 p.m., the tide came in as predicted. The water level rose maybe 8 feet, covering the lower rocks but staying well below our campsite. The sound of the waves grew louder, nearly drowning out the singing. We went to sleep around 11. Rebecca and I shared one tent. The kids had their own. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the water, the singing, Rebecca's breathing beside me. I remember thinking we'd found something special, a place we'd remember for years, a perfect family adventure. I fell asleep easily. I didn't know yet that we'd never leave. I need to explain who we were before the caves, because it matters. We weren't thrill seekers. We weren't running from anything. We were a normal family from Northeast Portland, with a mortgage and 2 cars, and a golden retriever we'd left with Rebecca's parents for the week. Rebecca and I met in college, both of us at Portland State. She was studying music education. I was in the physics program. We married young, at 24, bought our first house at 26. Emma was born when we were 28, Michael when we were 31. Our life had been predictable in the best way. Steady jobs, good schools for the kids, annual camping trips, Sunday dinners with family. Emma had just finished her freshman year of high school. She'd made honor roll, joined the Marine Biology Club, spent her free time volunteering at the Oregon Coast Aquarium. She wanted to study oceanography in college, maybe work for NOAA someday. She was quiet, serious, the kind of kid who read scientific papers for fun. Michael was finishing 6th grade. He played soccer, loved video games, collected rocks and fossils. He was more outgoing than his sister, always making friends, always talking. He'd recently gotten interested in geology after a field trip to the Columbia River Gorge. He carried a rock hammer on our camping trips, looking for interesting specimens. Rebecca taught 12 piano students, kids from the neighborhood mostly. She'd been playing since she was 5, had considered a performance career before deciding she preferred teaching. She practiced every morning, usually Chopin or Debussy. I'd wake to piano music drifting up from the living room. I taught physics at Franklin High. School had been there for 11 years. I coached the Science Olympiad team, ran the astronomy club, took students on field trips to OMSI and the university labs. I loved teaching, loved watching kids understand concepts they'd thought were impossible. I had tenure, good benefits, a pension building. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We saved money by camping instead of flying to resorts. The kids didn't mind. They'd grown up hiking and kayaking, could identify plants and animal tracks, knew how to build a fire and pitch a tent. We'd camped at probably 30 different sites around Oregon and Washington over the years. That summer, we'd planned 2 weeks of exploring the coast. 1 week, kayaking from Yachts to Florence, camping at designated sites. 1 week at a beach house in Cannon Beach that Rebecca's sister owned. The kayaking portion was meant to be the adventure part, the beach house the relaxation part. We launched from Yachts on July 13th, 2019, Saturday morning. Clear skies, light winds. The outfitter gave us 2 tandem kayaks, dry bags for our gear, a waterproof map of designated camping areas. The owner, a woman in her 60s who'd been running kayak tours for 30 years, went through the safety briefing. She warned us about the tides, the currents around the headlands, the importance of checking weather forecasts. She didn't mention the Mermaids' grottos. I don't know if she knew about them. Our first day, we paddled 12 miles south, stopped at a beach camp near Stonefield Beach State Recreation Site. The next morning, we continued south. The coastline was stunning. Sea stacks, hidden coves, cliffs covered in spruce and pine. We saw gray whales in the distance, sea lions hauled out on rocks, countless seabirds. Around noon on July 14th, we stopped for lunch at a small beach accessible only by water. That's when Emma spotted the harbor seals. There were maybe 8 of them, playing in the waves near a rocky headland half a mile south. She grabbed her camera, asked if we could paddle closer. The seals led us to the caves. I'm certain of that now. They swam directly to that narrow opening in the cliff face, disappeared inside. Emma wanted to follow. Michael wanted to follow. Rebecca said it looked interesting. I was the cautious one, always had been. I checked the tide chart, checked the time. Low tide for another 3 hours. Plenty of time to explore and leave before the water rose. That decision changed everything. Inside the main cavern exceeded anything I'd expected. The shelf where we eventually camped was obvious. Flat, dry, protected. The natural skylight in the adjacent chamber meant we had multiple options for ventilation and emergency exit if needed. The tidal pools were clean, full of sea life. In my mind, this was safer than camping on an exposed beach where winds could damage our tents or high waves could reach our gear. We spent the afternoon exploring. The cave system was extensive. The main cavern connected to at least 6 other chambers through narrow passages. Some were completely dark, requiring flashlights. Others had cracks in the ceiling that let in filtered daylight. The water levels varied by chamber. Some had deep pools. Others were mostly dry rock. In one chamber, Emma found small fish trapped in a tidal pool. She identified them as sculpins, common along the coast. Michael found fossilized shells embedded in the rock walls. I took photos of the geological formations, thinking I could show my students. Rebecca recorded the acoustics on her phone, fascinated by how sound moved through the space. We found the carvings that afternoon, but we didn't understand them yet. They were in the chamber with the collapsed ceiling, the one with the natural skylight. The walls there were covered with marks. Some looked ancient, others more recent. Names and dates, mostly. Initials carved with knives or scratched with rocks. Some in English, some in what looked like Spanish, some in characters I didn't recognize. The oldest date I saw was 1847. The most recent was 2003. Between them, dozens of others. I assumed they were from explorers, adventurers who'd found this place over the centuries and left their mark. Michael wanted to add our names. I told him no, to leave no trace. There were other markings too, drawings that looked older than the names and dates. Simple figures scratched into the rock, human shapes, fish shapes, things that might have been boats, and words carved deeper than the names. Not English, not Spanish. Languages I couldn't identify. One phrase appeared multiple times, always near the water level, always in different scripts. Do not answer. I saw it in English twice, once in what might have been French, once in characters that looked Asian. The same warning, repeated across centuries. I took a photo of it. Rebecca asked what I thought it meant. I said probably some kind of echo effect, a warning not to shout because the sound would be deafening. She accepted that explanation. So did I. We should have left then. We should have packed up, paddled out, continued to the designated campsite 3 miles south. But the afternoon was beautiful, the cave was comfortable, and we were already set up. The singing had started, but it was pleasant, almost soothing. Just acoustic phenomena, I told myself. Just wind and water. That night, after we'd eaten dinner and the kids had gone to their tent, Rebecca and I sat outside ours, watching the lantern light flicker on the cave walls. She said this was one of the best trips we'd taken. She felt peaceful here, disconnected from work and schedules and obligations. I agreed. The singing grew louder after midnight. I woke to it, checked my watch. 12:47 a.m. The sound had changed slightly, become more complex. Multiple harmonies, overlapping melodies, still wordless, still musical. Rebecca was asleep beside me. I listened for maybe 10 minutes, trying to identify the source. The sound seemed to come from the deeper passages, from directions we hadn't fully explored. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, walked to the edge of our campsite. The tide had come in fully, covering the lower rocks. The water looked black in the darkness, almost oily. The singing continued, echoing off the walls. I shined my light toward the nearest passage leading deeper into the cave system. Something moved in the water. Just a ripple. Probably a fish. The harbor seals might have stayed in the caves, might be swimming through the flooded passages. I watched for another minute, saw nothing else. I returned to the tent, convinced myself I was overtired, seeing things. I fell asleep again around 1:30 a.m. When I woke the next morning, Emma was screaming. Emma's scream pulled me from sleep at 6:23 a.m. I checked my watch out of habit. Teacher's instinct to note the time. Rebecca was already moving, unzipping the tent. I grabbed my flashlight and followed her out. Emma stood outside the kids' tent, her sleeping bag wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was pale. Michael stood behind her, looking confused but not frightened. The morning light filtered through the cave entrance, gray and weak. She said someone touched her foot. She'd been asleep, felt pressure on her ankle through the sleeping bag, felt fingers squeeze. She woke and saw a hand pulling back, disappearing through the tent's open vent at the bottom. A pale hand, she said. Wrong shape. Too many joints in the fingers. I examined the tent. The bottom vent was open, a mesh screen meant for airflow. I checked it yesterday before they went to sleep. Properly sealed. Zipper closed. Now the zipper was open, the vent gaping. The ground around the tent was damp. Not wet like water had pooled there, but damp like something wet had passed by recently. Rebecca asked if Emma had gotten up during the night, maybe walked to the water, gotten her feet wet. Emma said no, she hadn't left the tent. Michael confirmed he hadn't heard her move. He'd slept through whatever happened. I found the handprint on Emma's sleeping bag 10 minutes later, after we'd calmed her down and gotten her to unzip the bag for inspection. The print was on the outer surface, down near the foot area. Wet but not soaking, already starting to dry in the cave's cool air. The print was palm down, fingers spread, roughly hand-sized, maybe slightly larger than mine, but the proportions were off. The fingers were too long, the spaces between them too wide. The palm seemed narrower than it should be, and there were 6 marks, not 5. 4 fingers, a thumb, and something else on the opposite side. A second thumb, maybe, or an extra digit where there shouldn't be one. Rebecca saw it. Her face went still. She looked at me, then at the kids. Michael wanted to see. I angled the sleeping bag so the light hit the print clearly. He went quiet. I told them it was probably from one of us, distorted by the fabric, smeared when Emma moved in her sleep. My voice sounded unconvincing even to me. Rebecca didn't argue, but I saw her expression. She didn't believe my explanation any more than I did. We ate breakfast in near silence. Granola bars, dried fruit, water filtered from the tidal pools. The singing had stopped sometime during the night. The cave felt different in the daylight, less magical, more oppressive. The shadows seemed darker. The constant sound of water echoed louder. Emma wanted to leave. She said we should pack up, paddle out, continue to the planned campsite. Michael agreed. Rebecca looked at me, waiting for my decision. I said we'd leave after breakfast, get an early start on the day's paddle. I began packing our gear, rolling up sleeping bags, collapsing the tents. Rebecca helped. The kids gathered their belongings, stuffed everything into dry bags. That's when I noticed my phone had no signal. I'd had 1 bar yesterday near the entrance, enough to check the tide chart. Now nothing. I walked closer to the entrance, held the phone up, moved to different positions. 0 bars. No signal anywhere. Rebecca checked hers. Same result. We had a satellite emergency beacon in one of the dry bags, standard safety equipment made for kayaking trips. I found it. Checked the battery indicator. Full charge. The device was functioning normally. I didn't activate it. We weren't in an emergency yet, just spooked by strange acoustics and a smeared handprint. We finished packing by 7:45 a.m. The tide was still relatively high but dropping. We'd have to wait another hour for the water level to drop enough to safely navigate the entrance. The passage was narrow, and trying to paddle through during high tide meant risking the kayaks scraping against the rocks or getting caught by an unexpected surge. I suggested we use the time to explore the chamber with the skylight one more time, get a better look at the carvings in full daylight. Rebecca disagreed. She wanted to wait by the entrance, be ready to leave the moment the tide allowed. Emma sided with her mother. Michael said he'd stay with me. We split up. Rebecca and Emma carried the packed gear closer to the entrance, set up near the water to watch the tide. Michael and I walked back toward the chamber with the collapsed ceiling. I wanted another look at those warnings carved into the rock. Something about them bothered me. The chamber was maybe 150 feet from our campsite, through a passage that required ducking under a low overhang. The skylight above cast a column of gray morning light through the opening. The walls were black basalt, wet with condensation. The carvings were easier to see in the direct light. I counted 17 instances of "do not answer" or variations in different languages. I photographed each one. Michael found more drawings. Human figures near water. Fish shapes with what might have been human features. Symbols I didn't recognize. One drawing showed a figure with its mouth open, and next to it, another figure, being pulled into water by something with many arms. Michael asked what it meant. I said probably cautionary tales, stories meant to scare people into being careful near the water. Ancient cultures often created myths about water spirits to keep people from drowning. These drawings fit that pattern. He pointed to one carving I hadn't noticed, fresh compared to the others, done with a knife or sharp tool, not worn by time. The letters were clear. 2003, Johnson family, trapped, don't sing back. The date matched the most recent one I'd seen carved with the names. The same year. I took a photo, my hands suddenly unsteady. Trapped, don't sing back. The singing we'd heard, the constant background music we'd attributed to acoustics. Michael asked if we were trapped. I said no, of course not. The entrance was open, the tide was dropping, we'd be paddling out in less than an hour. He seemed satisfied, but I wasn't. I searched the chamber more carefully, looking for other recent carvings. I found two more. 1987, D. Martinez, can't leave, they watch. And below it, 1994, if you read this, bring help, Sutton family, 3 months here, 3 months. My chest tightened. I took photos of everything, documented every carving I could find. Michael stayed close, quieter now. He asked if the families got out. I said I didn't know, but probably. These carvings were old. If people had been trapped here, rescue would have come, eventually. We returned to the main cavern at 8:30 a.m. Rebecca and Emma were still by the entrance, watching the water. The tide had dropped maybe 2 feet. Rebecca said another 30 minutes, and we could navigate out safely. She asked what we'd found. I showed her the photos. She stared at the image of the 2003 carving for a long time. Then she looked toward the deeper passages, toward where the singing had come from last night. She asked if I thought the families in the carvings had heard singing too. I said probably. Cave acoustics. Could be powerful, disorienting. People might have panicked, gotten lost in the passages, felt trapped by their own fear. Emma said we should leave now, risk the tide. I explained why that wasn't safe. The narrow entrance, the kayaks, the possibility of capsizing in rough water. We'd wait 30 minutes. We'd leave safely. At 8:47 a.m., I carried the first kayak to the water's edge. The entrance was visible, maybe 200 feet away. Daylight beyond. Open ocean. Freedom. Rebecca helped me load our gear into the storage compartments. Emma and Michael prepared the second kayak. At 9 a.m., the water level was perfect. I tested the current near the entrance with a stick, flowing out gently as the tide retreated. Safe to paddle. Rebecca climbed into the front of our kayak. I pushed us into the water, settled into the back seat. Emma and Michael launched behind us. I took the first stroke, paddle biting into the water. We glided forward. The entrance grew closer, 150 feet, then 100. The daylight beyond looked impossibly bright after the cave's dimness. I could see the ocean, could see the sky. At 75 feet from the entrance, something changed. The water grew heavier. Not thicker, not visibly different, but resistant. Each paddle stroke required more effort. Rebecca felt it too. She looked back at me, confused. I told her to keep paddling. At 50 feet, the resistance became painful. My shoulders burned with each stroke. The kayak slowed despite our efforts. Behind us, Emma called out that something was wrong. They were experiencing the same thing. At 25 feet, I couldn't push the paddle through the water anymore. It felt like trying to paddle through setting concrete. Rebecca stopped paddling, turned to face me. Her expression was frightened now. I tried one more stroke, using all my strength. The paddle barely moved. Then the pulling started. The pulling wasn't like a current. Currents push or drag. It felt internal, like something was reaching into my chest and pulling backward, away from the entrance. Rebecca felt it first. She made a sound, almost a gasp, and pressed her hand to her sternum. I felt it a second later. Pressure behind my ribs, growing stronger the closer we got to the entrance. Not pain exactly, but profound discomfort, like the feeling of holding your breath too long, but centered in your chest instead of your lungs. The sensation increased with every second we stayed near the entrance. Behind us, Michael cried out. Emma was trying to paddle forward, fighting whatever was happening. I watched their kayaks slow, stop, begin drifting backward. We were all being pulled back into the cave. I reversed my paddle strokes, helping the pull instead of fighting it. The chest pressure eased immediately. Rebecca did the same. Within 30 seconds, we drifted back to the 100-foot mark, and the pressure vanished completely. I could breathe normally again. Emma and Michael reached us. Michael's face was red, tears on his cheeks. Emma looked shocked, her paddle resting across the kayak. She asked what that was. I had no answer. Rebecca wanted to try again, and she said maybe we'd imagined it. Maybe it was panic or hyperventilation. I knew that wasn't true, but I agreed to try. We couldn't just accept that we couldn't leave. That wasn't possible. We paddled forward again, slower this time, paying attention to exactly when the sensation started. At 100 feet, nothing. At 75 feet, the water resistance began. At 50 feet, the chest pressure started. At 25 feet, it became unbearable. I pushed through the pain, kept paddling. Rebecca did too. The pressure built until I thought my chest would collapse inward. My vision started to blur at the edges. I heard myself making sounds, strangled breathing, couldn't stop. 10 feet from the entrance, 5 feet. I could see rocks outside the cave, could see a bird flying past. Then I blacked out. I came to lying on the rocky shelf near our former campsite. Rebecca was above me, her hands on my shoulders. Emma was crying. Michael stood back, hugging himself. I'd fallen unconscious in the kayak, Rebecca said. She'd barely managed to keep me from falling into the water. Emma and Michael had helped tow our kayak back, helped pull me onto the rocks. My chest ached like I'd been hit with something heavy. I sat up slowly, checking for injuries. No broken bones, no bleeding. Just deep pain in my sternum and ribs, like severe bruising from the inside. Rebecca said we weren't leaving. Not today. Maybe not ever. Her voice was flat, stating fact rather than opinion. Emma argued. There had to be another way out, through the skylight chamber maybe, or one of the other passages. Michael said nothing, just stood there shaking. I told them we'd rest, eat something, think clearly. Panic wouldn't help. There had to be a logical explanation, some kind of gas in the cave maybe. Carbon dioxide buildup that caused physical symptoms when we approached the entrance. Or electromagnetic fields, affecting our bodies. Something explainable. We ate lunch. trail mix, beef jerky, water. The singing started again around 1 p.m., softer than last night. Gentle, almost lullaby-like. Emma put her hands over her ears. Rebecca stared toward the deeper passages, listening. After lunch, I explored alone, while the others stayed by the entrance. I checked every chamber, every passage, looking for alternative exits. The skylight in one chamber was maybe 30 feet above the floor. The opening was large enough for a person to fit through, but the walls beneath it were smooth basalt, impossible to climb without gear we didn't have. I tried anyway. Got maybe 6 feet up before I fell, landed hard on my back. The wind knocked out of me, more bruises. I lay there for several minutes, staring up at the circle of sky, watching clouds pass. In another chamber, I found a passage that sloped upward, looked like it might lead to the surface. I followed it for maybe 200 feet, crawling through increasingly narrow spaces. The passage ended in a collapse, tons of rock blocking any further progress. I turned back, scraped and dirty. A third chamber had what looked like a horizontal tunnel at the waterline, flooded but possibly connecting to the ocean. I couldn't explore it without diving gear. I marked it mentally as a possibility if we became desperate enough to try swimming out underwater. I returned to the main cavern at 4 p.m. The others had set up the tents again, accepting that we'd spend at least one more night here. Emma wouldn't look at me. Michael asked if I'd found a way out. I said not yet, but I would keep looking. That night we ate dinner in silence, freeze-dried camping meals, heated with our camp stove. The singing grew louder as darkness fell. Multiple voices again, harmonizing. The sound seemed closer than last night, coming from more than one direction. Around 9 p.m., Michael said he needed to use the bathroom. We'd been using a spot in a side passage far from our campsite and the water. I walked with him, carrying a flashlight. The singing echoed weirdly in the passages, making it hard to judge direction or distance. Michael finished, and we started back. That's when he stopped suddenly, grabbed my arm. He pointed toward the water in the main cavern, visible from where we stood. Something was surfacing. The water rippled, broke. A head appeared, pale skin, almost luminescent in the darkness. Then shoulders, arms. The figure stayed partially submerged, only the upper body visible. It faced away from us, toward the deeper part of the cavern. More figures surfaced. I counted 5, then 7, then stopped counting. They floated in the water, mostly still, occasionally moving in ways that didn't look quite right. Their arms seemed to bend wrong. Their heads tilted at angles that made my stomach turn. The singing was coming from them. Their mouths moved, and the sound came out. Not one melody, but many, overlapping, creating harmonies that shouldn't work but did. Beautiful and wrong simultaneously. Michael whimpered. I put my hand over his mouth, pulled him back into the shadows of the passage. We stayed there for maybe 10 minutes, watching. The figures didn't come closer to our campsite. They stayed in the deeper water, singing, occasionally diving and resurfacing. One of them had something wrong with its arm. Extra joints, or maybe the arm divided into 2 separate limbs below the elbow. I couldn't see clearly enough to be sure. Another had a crest or fin along its spine, visible when it turned. They weren't human. They weren't seals or any marine mammal I recognized. They were something else entirely. The figures dove together, disappeared beneath the surface. The singing stopped abruptly. The cavern went silent except for the constant sound of waves. Michael and I waited another 5 minutes, then crept back to the campsite. Rebecca and Emma were in their tent. I told them to stay there, stay quiet. Michael and I entered our tent. I didn't tell Rebecca what we'd seen, not yet. I needed to process it first, needed to understand. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening. The singing started again around 11 p.m., distant this time. I heard splashing from the deeper chambers, sounds of movement in water. Whatever those things were, they lived in this cave system. They came out at night, sang, swam through the flooded passages, and somehow they were keeping us here. I didn't sleep. Michael didn't either. We lay in the darkness, listening to the singing, listening to Rebecca's breathing in the next tent, listening to water move in ways water shouldn't move. Around 3 a.m., something scraped against the outside of our tent, slow, deliberate, like fingers dragging across the fabric. Michael grabbed my arm. I grabbed the flashlight, pointed it at the tent wall. The scraping stopped. I heard something splash in the distance, rapid movement away from our campsite. At dawn, I found another handprint on the outside of our tent, larger than the one on Emma's sleeping bag. 6 digits. Wet. Already drying. I took a photo before wiping it away with my shirt. We'd been in the cave for 2 nights. Already I knew we weren't leaving. Already I understood that whatever had carved those warnings into the rock had tried to help future victims. And we'd ignored them all. On the morning of July 16th, our 3rd day in the caves, I told Rebecca everything Michael and I had seen. Emma deserved to know too, but Rebecca said not yet. Our daughter was barely holding together. Knowing there were creatures in the water would break her completely. Rebecca took the news better than I expected. She listened without interrupting, looked at the photo of the handprint on our tent, asked quiet questions about what the figures looked like. When I finished, she said she'd heard them the night before. Splashing, movement in the water, sounds that didn't match seals or fish. She'd suspected but hadn't wanted to confirm. We needed to understand the barrier. That became our priority. If we understood what was keeping us in, maybe we could find a way to break through it. I proposed systematic testing, approaching the entrance at different tide levels, different times of day, using different methods. Michael stayed with Emma while Rebecca and I worked. We started at 8 a.m. when the tide was low and the water calm. We approached the entrance on foot this time, walking along the rocks rather than using the kayaks. We could get farther before the sensation started, maybe 150 feet instead of a 100. At 100 feet, the pulling began. Light at first, barely noticeable. At 75 feet, it became distinct. Pressure in the chest, sense of movement backward, even when standing still. At 50 feet, pain started. At 25 feet, the pain became severe. I pushed to 20 feet before I had to stop. The pulling felt like it would tear something inside me. Rebecca made it to 15 feet, then collapsed. I dragged her back, and the pain eased. We sat at the 100-foot mark, catching our breath. The barrier wasn't uniform. We discovered this through testing. Standing still at the 50-foot mark, the pain remained constant. Taking a step forward, the pain increased. Taking a step back, it decreased. The effect was progressive, getting worse the closer we got to freedom. Rebecca suggested we try running through it. If the barrier was based on proximity and exposure time, maybe we could sprint through before the pain became unbearable. I argued against it. I'd blacked out yesterday, trying to push through. Running might cause both of us to lose consciousness at the entrance, fall into the water, drown. We tried anyway. Rebecca went first. She started at the 100-foot mark, sprinted toward the entrance. She made it to maybe 10 feet before she stumbled, fell to her knees. I reached her in seconds. She was conscious but gasping, both hands pressed to her chest. Blood trickled from her nose. I got her back to the safe zone. The nosebleed stopped after a few minutes. She said it felt like her chest was imploding, like being crushed from the inside. She couldn't have made it through the entrance. The pain would have killed her. We tested other possibilities throughout the day. We tried throwing objects through the entrance. They passed through normally, splashed into the ocean outside. We tried extending a paddle through, holding it while standing at the 25-foot mark. The paddle went through fine. The problem wasn't the physical space. It was something about living bodies. Late afternoon, I swam underwater, holding my breath, seeing if submersion changed the effect. It didn't. The barrier worked the same underwater as on the surface. Maybe worse. The pressure built faster, made it harder to judge how close I was to the limit before I'd black out. By evening, we'd established the facts. The barrier started at approximately 200 feet from the entrance, measured from the deepest point we could go without any symptoms. It increased gradually until the 25-foot mark, then increased exponentially. At 10 feet, the pain was debilitating. At 5 feet, unconsciousness was likely. We had no data for closer than that. Neither of us could stay conscious enough to measure. The barrier existed at all tide levels, all times of day. It affected both of us equally, regardless of who went first or whether we approached together or separately. It seemed to target whatever made us alive. Our heartbeat, our breathing, something essential. Emma asked if we'd found a way out. I said not yet. She started crying. Michael put his arm around her. Rebecca and I looked at each other, and I saw the same realization in her eyes that I felt. We weren't getting out, not through the entrance. That night we held a family meeting. I explained the barrier as scientifically as I could, avoiding speculation about causes. Emma asked the question we'd all been avoiding. How long could we survive here? I calculated out loud. We had food for maybe 2 more days if we rationed carefully. Water was available. The filtered seepage from the rocks was fresh enough to drink. We could catch fish from the tidal pools, eat seaweed, maybe trap crabs when the tide came in. Theoretically, we could survive indefinitely on the available resources. Emma asked about rescue. I'd been thinking about this all day. Our families expected us back in 8 days, at the end of our 2-week trip. When we didn't return, they'd call the authorities. Search and rescue would look for us. They'd check the designated campsites along our planned route, search the coastline, but they wouldn't find us. We were in a cave that wasn't on any maps, accessible only by water, invisible from the land. The kayak outfitter in Yakats knew our planned route. Designated sites only, nowhere near here. Even if searchers came close, they'd see the narrow entrance and assume we couldn't have entered, or wouldn't be stupid enough to camp inside sea caves. Michael asked about the emergency beacon. I'd been avoiding activating it because I didn't understand our situation yet. But now, 3 days in, unable to leave, I decided it was time. I retrieved the beacon from our gear, checked the battery again, activated it. The beacon transmitted our GPS coordinates to a satellite network monitored by rescue services. The signal would bring helicopters, Coast Guard boats, trained rescuers. They'd find the cave entrance, see our kayaks on the rocks inside. They'd come for us, except they wouldn't be able to reach us. The barrier would stop them too. I didn't tell my family that part. Let them have hope for now. I activated the beacon at 8:47 p.m. and set it on a rock near the entrance, where the signal would be strongest. The indicator light blinked red, showing active transmission. We ate dinner, our smallest portions yet, rationing what remained. The singing started as we cleaned up. And this time Emma didn't cover her ears. She just sat there listening, tears running down her face. Rebecca held her. Michael asked if the things in the water were keeping us here. I said, I didn't know. Maybe they were. Maybe the barrier was natural, some geological or electromagnetic phenomenon we didn't understand, and the creatures just happened to live here. Or maybe they'd created it, trapped us deliberately. The singing grew louder, more voices than previous nights, coming from multiple directions. I counted at least 20 distinct vocal tracks, maybe more. They were all around us, in the deeper passages, in the flooded chambers, everywhere. Around midnight, they surfaced in the main cavern again. Rebecca and I watched from the tent entrance. Emma and Michael were supposed to be sleeping, but I knew they were listening. The figures floated in the water, barely visible in the darkness. Their singing filled the cave, echoed until it seemed to come from the walls themselves. One of them swam closer than the others had before, maybe 50 feet from our campsite. I could see it more clearly. Pale skin with a texture that looked almost translucent, as if I could see the structures beneath. Dark eyes without visible pupils. A mouth that opened too wide, showing what might have been teeth or something else. I couldn't tell. It watched our tent for maybe 5 minutes, floating motionless in the water. Then it dove, and the others followed. The singing stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the waves. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my sleeping bag, thinking about the Johnson family who'd carved their names in 2003. the Martinez family in 1987, the Suttons in 1994. All of them trapped here, just like us. All of them trying to warn future victims with their carvings. I wondered if any of them survived, if anyone ever got out, or if their bones were somewhere deeper in the cave system, in passages we hadn't explored yet. At dawn on July 17th, our fourth day in the Mermaids' grottos, I made a decision. We would survive. We would learn to live in this cave, use every resource available, stay healthy and sane until rescue came. And I would document everything, carve our own warnings into the rock, leave evidence of what happened here. If we died in this place, at least future victims would know the truth. By the end of our first week in the caves, we'd established routines. Structure was necessary. Without schedules, without purpose, we'd lose ourselves to the constant darkness and singing. I'd seen it happen to students during depression. The collapse of daily patterns leading to complete dysfunction. I wouldn't let that happen to my family. We woke at dawn when the first light filtered through the cave entrance. Rebecca instituted morning exercises, stretches, bodyweight movements, anything to keep our muscles from atrophying. Emma resisted at first, but Rebecca insisted. Michael participated without complaint. I joined them, though my chest still ached from trying to break through the barrier. After exercise, breakfast. We'd run out of our camping food on day 5. Now we ate what the cave provided. Fish from the tidal pools, mostly sculpins and small rockfish. Crabs that ventured into the shallow water during high tide. Mussels attached to the rocks near the waterline. Seaweed that grew in the chambers with natural light. I taught Michael how to make fish traps from supplies in our kayaks. Rope, mesh bags, stones for weight. We baited them with scraps, placed them in the tidal pools, checked them twice daily. The yield was small but consistent. 2 or 3 fish per day. Enough protein for 4 people if we supplemented with shellfish. Rebecca found edible seaweed growing in the chamber with the skylight. She'd taken a marine biology course in college, recognized several species as safe. We harvested it carefully, leaving enough to regenerate. It tasted terrible, but it provided nutrients we couldn't get from fish alone. Water was less problematic than I'd feared. Fresh water seeped through cracks in several locations, collected in natural depressions in the rock. The flow was slow but constant. We set up our water bottles to catch the drips, rotated them as they filled. The water tasted mineral-heavy but clean. We boiled it anyway, using our camp stove until the fuel ran out on day 9, then drinking it filtered through cloth. Emma tracked our food supply in a notebook. She created charts showing daily intake, estimated nutritional content, identified deficiencies. Her marine biology interest became practical knowledge. She knew which fish were fatty, which were lean, which shellfish to avoid during certain seasons. We established sleeping schedules. Someone always stayed awake, keeping watch. The things in the water had come closer to our campsite on night 4, and again on night 6. They didn't attack, didn't threaten, just observed, but we couldn't trust that pattern would continue. During my watch shifts, usually midnight to 4 a.m., I explored. I mapped the cave systems methodically, sketching each chamber, each passage, measuring distances by counting steps. I marked dangerous areas, deep pools, unstable rocks, passages prone to flooding. I searched for alternative exits, for weaknesses in the barrier, for anything useful. I found 3 more collapsed passages that might have led to the surface. All were blocked by tons of rock. I found a chamber so deep in the system that no light reached it, where the singing echoed loudest. I didn't enter that chamber. Something about the darkness there felt wrong, felt occupied. Rebecca taught piano lessons without a piano. She used a flat rock as a keyboard, drew the keys with chalk from our first aid kit. She taught Emma and Michael scales, basic songs, rhythm exercises. The repetitive practice gave them something to focus on besides our situation. I'd hear them during the day, tapping on the rock, counting beats, Rebecca correcting their timing. I taught physics using whatever, Materials we had. We studied waves by observing the tide, calculated volumes of the chambers, discussed acoustics, and why the singing echoed the way it did. Michael was more interested than he'd ever been in school. Emma asked questions that challenged my knowledge. Teaching kept my mind sharp, gave me purpose. On day 10, the emergency beacon's battery died. I'd been checking it daily, watching the indicator light fade from bright red to dim orange. When it went dark, Emma cried. That beacon had been our connection to the outside world, our guarantee that help was coming. I told her the rescue was still coming. The beacon had transmitted for 10 days. Someone had received our signal, would be searching. The Coast Guard was probably looking for us right now. We just had to wait, stay alive, stay ready. I didn't believe it anymore. 10 days was too long. If rescue was coming, they'd have found us by now. On day 12, Rebecca cut her hand badly while prying a mussel off the rocks. The eye wound was deep, bled heavily. We had basic first aid supplies, bandages, antiseptic ointment, pain relievers. I cleaned the wound, wrapped it tightly. She said it hurt, but she could move her fingers, could make a fist. Probably no tendon damage. The wound got infected anyway. By day 14, her hand was swollen, red streaks extending up her forearm. She developed a fever. We had antibiotics in the first aid kit, amoxicillin from a previous prescription I brought just in case. I gave her the pills, kept her hand elevated, changed the bandages twice daily. The infection cleared slowly. The fever broke on day 16. The wound started healing on day 18, but Rebecca was weaker after that, needed more rest, couldn't help with food gathering as much. Emma took over some of her tasks without being asked. We celebrated 3 weeks in the caves with a slightly larger dinner, 4 fish instead of 3, extra seaweed, handful of mussels each. Michael said it was the worst birthday party ever. His actual birthday was in November, but the joke landed anyway. We laughed. First real laughter since we'd been trapped. That night the singing changed. New voices joined the chorus, higher pitched, almost childlike. The sound made my skin crawl. Emma covered her ears again, something she hadn't done in days. Michael pressed close to me in our tent. The figures surfaced closer than ever before, 20 feet from our campsite, clearly visible in the lantern light. I counted 11 of them. They were more varied than I'd realized. Different sizes, different features, some with fins or crests, some without. One had skin that looked almost scaled. Another had what might have been gills on its neck. They watched us for over an hour. Didn't approach closer, didn't retreat, just floated there, singing, staring. Their eyes reflected the lantern light, created points of brightness in the darkness. Too many eyes. I counted more than 11 pairs. More of them were underwater, staying hidden. When they finally dove and disappeared, Emma said she couldn't do this anymore. She wanted to try the barrier again, wanted to risk the pain, risk unconsciousness, risk death if it meant a chance at escape. Rebecca said no. I said no. Michael said nothing, but I saw him nod slightly when Emma spoke. On day 26, we found the first skeleton. I was exploring a passage that flooded during high tide, but was accessible for a few hours twice daily when the water dropped. The passage led to a small chamber I hadn't reached before. Inside, partially buried in silt and shells, were bones. Human bones. A complete skeleton, articulated. Lying on its side, scraps of cloth clung to some bones. Synthetic fabric, modern. Near the skull sat a waterproof watch, still intact. I pulled it out, wiped off the sediment. The date function showed December 2003. The Johnson family. They'd carved their warning in 2003. This was probably one of them. I searched the chamber, thoroughly. No other bones, no other belongings. Just this one person, who died here alone, and whose body had been left to decay in the darkness. I wondered where the rest of the family was. If they'd died together, if their bones were scattered through other chambers. I didn't tell the kids about the skeleton. I told Rebecca that night, after Emma and Michael were asleep. She asked if we were going to die here too. I said no. We were adapting, surviving, staying healthy. We'd last longer than previous victims because we were being smart about resources and safety. She asked how much longer we had. I did the math out loud. Our camping equipment was degrading, tents showing wear, sleeping bags damp and starting to smell, clothes deteriorating from constant moisture. Our mental health was stable, but declining. Emma was withdrawing, speaking less each day. Michael had nightmares every night. Rebecca's hand had healed, but she'd lost weight. We all had. And she tired easily. I estimated 6 months before our situation became critical. Maybe a year if we were lucky. After that, disease or injury or malnutrition would kill us. Or the things in the water would. On day 30, exactly 1 month after we'd entered the caves, I carved our names in the chamber with the other warnings. I used my rock hammer, spent 3 hours scratching letters into the basalt. 2019, Chen family, trapped, barrier at entrance, creatures in water, don't answer singing. Emma found me finishing the carving. She read it, then asked if I thought anyone would find it. I said probably. Eventually, maybe years from now, maybe decades, but someone would explore these caves and see our warning. They'd know we were here. They'd know we tried to survive. She asked if that was enough, if leaving a warning was the best we could do. I didn't have an answer. That night, for the first time since we'd been trapped, I broke down. I waited until everyone was asleep, walked to the farthest chamber I'd explored, sat in the darkness, and cried. Quietly, so my family wouldn't hear. I cried for the life we'd lost, for the simple things I'd taken for granted. Hot showers, clean clothes, fresh food, beds, safety. I cried for my kids, who trusted me to keep them safe and who I'd failed completely. When I returned to the campsite, Rebecca was awake. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just held me, and I held her. And we didn't speak. 2 months into our captivity, I saw one of them clearly for the first time. It happened during a day watch shift while the others slept. I was checking the fish traps in a tidal pool near the cavern's eastern edge, and I heard splashing from a partially flooded passage nearby. I approached slowly, flashlight in hand. The passage was narrow, water-filled, except for a small air gap near the ceiling. Something moved in the water, creating ripples that caught the light. I knelt at the passage entrance, shined the flashlight down the tunnel. A face looked back at me. It was maybe 10 feet away, just beneath the water surface. Large dark eyes without visible whites, positioned slightly farther apart than human eyes. Nose almost flat against the face, with slits for nostrils. Mouth wide, lipless. Skin pale gray, with an undertone that might have been blue or green. Hard to tell in the flashlight beam. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds. The creature didn't blink, didn't move except for gentle motions that kept it stationary against the current. Its face was almost human in structure. 2 eyes, nose, mouth in the right configuration. But the proportions were wrong. The eyes too large, the jaw too wide, the skull elongated. Then it opened its mouth. The jaw unhinged, dropped far lower than any human jaw could. Inside, rows of teeth, small and numerous, like a shark's. Not for tearing, I realized, for gripping, holding onto slippery prey. It made a sound, not the musical singing I'd heard every night. This was different, a clicking, crackling noise that hurt my ears. Communication, maybe, or echolocation. The sound echoed in the narrow passage, multiplied. I backed away. The creature watched me retreat, then slowly sank beneath the surface. The water stilled. I stood there for several minutes, waiting, but it didn't resurface. I told Rebecca about the encounter immediately. She asked if it had tried to hurt me. I said no. It had just watched, just studied me the way I'd studied it. She asked what I thought they were. I had theories, but no certainty. They were aquatic, obviously. They lived in the flooded passages and deep chambers, came to the shallower areas at night. They were intelligent. The singing proved that, and the way they observed us showed curiosity. awareness. They had some connection to the barrier, whether they'd created it or just benefited from it. But their origin was a mystery. Evolved humans who'd adapted to aquatic life. Separate species that had developed parallel to humans, something older, something that had been in the oceans before humans existed. I had no data, just observations. Michael saw one on day 63. He was urinating in our designated area when he heard splashing. He turned and saw a figure in the water, partially emerged. Smaller than the ones I'd seen, maybe 5 feet tall. Watching him, he ran back to the campsite, terrified. I went to investigate but found nothing. Just ripples in the water, signs that something had been there. Michael described it. Pale skin, large eyes, webbed fingers. His description matched what I'd seen. Emma refused to look at them. When they surfaced at night, she stayed in the tent, hands pressed over her ears. She said she could feel them watching, even through the tent fabric. She said their singing was getting inside her head, making her think things she didn't want to think. Rebecca asked what kinds of things. Emma wouldn't say, just shook her head, pressed her hands harder against her ears. On day 70, one of them left something for us. I found it in the morning, placed on a rock near our campsite. A fish, freshly killed, still bleeding. Larger than anything we'd caught in our traps, maybe 3 pounds. It sat on the rock like an offering, like a gift. I examined it carefully. No signs of poison, no strange markings. It was a lingcod, common along the Oregon coast. I checked for parasites. Found none. The fish appeared safe to eat. We cooked it that evening, divided it among the 4 of us. The largest meal we'd had in weeks. The fish tasted normal, caused no illness. But the implications disturbed me. The creatures knew where we camped. They knew we ate fish. They deliberately left food for us. Were they trying to help us? Or were they fattening us up, keeping us healthy for some purpose I didn't understand? More offerings appeared. Every few days, another fish on the rock. Once, several crabs alive and tied together with some kind of kelp rope. Once, a cluster of mussels already removed from their shells, ready to eat. We accepted the food. We had no choice. Our traps weren't providing enough protein, and we were all losing weight steadily. Emma said we shouldn't take their food. She said it meant something, accepting gifts from them. She said they were changing the rules, making us dependent. But she ate the fish anyway, because she was hungry, because we were all hungry. On day 8, I saw them hunting. I was awake during a night watch, sitting near the water, and I heard splashing from one of the deeper chambers. I approached quietly, keeping my flashlight off. The chamber was large, mostly flooded, with a high ceiling. In the darkness, I could see movement. Multiple figures swimming, coordinating. They were herding fish, driving them into a narrow passage where more of them waited. The trapped fish thrashed, trying to escape. The creatures caught them with their hands, with their mouths, efficient and quick. They shared the catch. I watched as they divided the fish among themselves, passing them to individuals who hung back, who hadn't participated in the hunt. Young ones, I realized, smaller figures that stayed near the adults, that received food first. They had families, social structures, care for their offspring. One of the adults noticed me watching. It paused mid-motion, fish in its hands, and looked directly at me. I couldn't see its expression in the darkness, couldn't read anything from its posture, but it held my gaze for several seconds before returning to feeding. I was an observer, I realized, not a threat. They'd accepted my presence, at least while I stayed passive. They'd drawn boundaries. We stayed in the shallow areas. They controlled the deep chambers. We didn't interfere with each other, except for the barrier. They were keeping us here, trapping us. Whether through technology or biology or something else, they were responsible. And they were watching us slowly starve, slowly deteriorate, doing nothing to help beyond occasional fish offerings. On day 90, Rebecca asked me if I'd tried answering the singing. I said no, never. She said she'd been thinking about it. The warnings carved in the rock said, "Don't answer," implied that answering caused something bad. But what if answering was the key? What if responding to them was how we earned release? I reminded her of what happened to the Johnson family. The carving said, "Don't sing back." They'd learned that rule somehow, probably through tragedy. We couldn't risk testing it. She said we couldn't risk not testing it either. We were dying slowly. In another few months, we'd be too weak to function, too malnourished to think clearly. We needed to try everything, including the things that scared us. I refused. She dropped the subject, but I saw the way she looked toward the deeper chambers, the way she listened to the singing with new attention. She was considering it seriously, weighing the risk. On day 94, I found her sitting at the water's edge, humming, quietly, almost inaudibly, matching the pitch of the singing that drifted from the deeper passages. I grabbed her, pulled her back. She resisted, said she was just experimenting, just seeing if they'd respond. I told her what I'd found in the chamber, the skeleton, the 2003 date matching the Johnsons' warning. I told her about the other skeletons I'd found since then. 3 more, scattered through different chambers. All of them modern. All of them probably from families trapped here over the past decades. All of them dead, left to rot in the darkness. She asked how they died. I said I didn't know for sure. No obvious injuries on most skeletons. One had a fractured skull, might have fallen. Another had bones arranged strangely, scattered, like something had pulled the body apart. The others showed no clear cause. But I had theories. Starvation, disease, injury, exposure. Any of those could kill us eventually. Or the creatures could. If someone broke the rules, answered the singing, approached too close, the creatures might attack. The warning suggested as much. Rebecca promised not to, but I didn't trust the promise. I saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation I felt growing in myself. We were trapped, dying slowly, and the only things keeping us here were creatures we didn't understand and a barrier we couldn't explain. On day 100, 3 months after entering the caves, I held another family meeting. I told them about the skeletons, about my theories on how previous victims had died. I told them we needed to be smarter than those families, needed to survive longer, needed to stay disciplined. Emma asked how much longer. I couldn't answer honestly. Michael asked if rescue was still coming. I said I didn't know anymore. Rebecca asked if we should try to escape again, test the barrier with new approaches. I said yes. We'd try again. We'd test everything, explore every option, but we'd do it carefully, methodically. We wouldn't panic. We'd survive until we found a way out, or until someone found us, or until we couldn't survive anymore. That night the singing was louder than it had ever been. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds. They surrounded us, filled every chamber, echoed until the entire cave system resonated with their sound. Emma sobbed in her tent. Michael pressed against me, shaking. Rebecca sat at the tent entrance, staring into the darkness, listening. I watched the water, waiting for them to surface. They didn't. They stayed hidden, singing, making their presence known without showing themselves. A reminder, maybe, that this was their domain, their home. And we were just temporary visitors who couldn't leave. Rebecca answered the singing on day 107. I didn't see it happen. I was in a side passage, collecting seepage water, when I heard her voice echoing through the main cavern. Not speaking, not calling for help. Singing. I dropped the water bottles and ran. By the time I reached the campsite, she'd stopped, but I could see it in her face. The realization of what she'd done, the terror and fascination mixed together. Emma was staring at her mother, horrified. Michael had backed away, pressed himself against the cavern wall. I asked what happened. Rebecca said she'd been listening to the singing, trying to understand the pattern, the melody. Her music training had kicked in. She'd started analyzing intervals, chord progressions, rhythmic structures. And then, without thinking, without deciding, she joined in. Just a few notes, matching their pitch. Maybe 5 seconds of humming before she caught herself and stopped. 5 seconds. That's all it took. The singing from the deeper chambers stopped immediately when she'd answered. Complete silence fell over the cave system. The first time that had happened since our first night here. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds, and then the singing resumed. But different. Now, focused. All the voices singing the same melody, the same rhythm, perfectly synchronized. And the melody was Rebecca's. The exact notes she'd hummed, repeated back to her in dozens of voices, echoing through the chambers. She said it was beautiful. She said she'd felt something when she sang, like a connection forming, like recognition passing between her and whatever lived in the water. She said she'd felt seen, understood, for the first time since we'd been trapped. I told her she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd broken the most important rule, the one every warning carved in these rocks agreed on. Don't answer. Don't sing back. She'd done the one thing that killed previous victims. She said maybe the warnings were wrong. Maybe answering was how you communicated with them, how you negotiated release. Maybe the previous families had failed because they'd answered wrong, not because they'd answered at all. That night, nothing happened. The creatures didn't approach closer. The singing continued at normal levels. Rebecca slept normally, ate normally. By the next morning, I'd started to think, maybe she was right. Maybe the warnings were outdated. Maybe the rule had changed. Maybe answering wasn't dangerous anymore. I was wrong. The change started on day 108, about 18 hours after Rebecca had sung. She woke from sleep and said she could hear them clearly now. Not just the singing, individual voices, distinct tones, different emotions in each voice. She said one of them was sad. Another was curious. A third was angry, though she didn't know why. I asked if she'd heard distinct voices before. She said no. Before, the singing had been beautiful but incomprehensible, like listening to an orchestra warming up. Now she could hear every instrument separately, could follow individual melodic lines through the complex harmonies. Emma asked if that was bad. I said I didn't know. It might be neurological, might be Rebecca's brain creating patterns where none existed. Humans were good at that, finding faces in clouds, hearing words in random noise. Auditory pareidolia, I'd taught about it in class. Maybe the stress of our situation was causing Rebecca to hallucinate structure in the singing, but Rebecca insisted it was real. She said the voices were distinct. Individual personalities were evident in how they sang. She said she could almost understand what they were communicating, like listening to a foreign language you'd studied years ago and half remembered. On day 110, she started having trouble sleeping. She'd lie in her sleeping bag for hours, eyes open, listening to the singing. When she did sleep, she had dreams about water, about swimming in darkness, about breathing underwater. She'd wake gasping, confused about whether she was on land or submerged. On day 112, she asked to sleep near the water. She said the sound was clearer there, easier to understand. I said, absolutely not. We stayed in our tents, in the relatively safe zone we'd established, away from where the creatures surfaced. She argued. She said she needed to be closer, needed to hear them properly. I noticed she'd stopped saying it or them and started saying they, personifying them, treating them as individuals rather than threats. On day 115, I caught her at the water's edge at 3 a.m. She was sitting on the rocks, feet dangling in the water, humming softly, responding to the singing, engaging in what sounded like a call and response pattern. I pulled her back, and she fought me. Actually struggled, tried to return to the water. She said they were calling her. They wanted her to come closer. They had things to show her, things to teach her. They weren't dangerous, she insisted. They were beautiful, intelligent, lonely. They'd been here for so long, waiting for someone who could understand them. I physically restrained her, dragged her back to the campsite, made her stay in the tent. Emma and Michael watched, terrified. Their mother wasn't acting like their mother anymore. She was acting like someone possessed, obsessed, driven by compulsion she couldn't control. During the day, Rebecca seemed mostly normal. She helped with food preparation, talked with the kids, participated in our daily routines. But at night, when the singing started, she changed. She'd stop mid-sentence, cock her head, listen with intense focus. She'd whisper responses under her breath, too quiet for me to hear. She'd smile at things that weren't funny, laugh at nothing visible. On day 118, she told me what they wanted. She said they'd been showing her images, concepts, ideas that didn't translate to words. They wanted her to join them in the water. They wanted to teach her how to swim properly, how to dive deep, how to hold her breath for hours instead of minutes. They wanted to show her the passages that led to the open ocean, the underwater caves that connected to this system. She said they'd let us go if she came with them. They'd release the barrier, let Emma and Michael and me paddle out to freedom. All she had to do was enter the water, let them take her to the deep chambers. A trade. 1 life for 3. I told her they were lying. They were predators, manipulating her, using her own desperation against her. They weren't offering freedom. They were luring prey. She said I didn't understand. I couldn't hear them the way she could. They were genuine, honest. They'd been trapped here as much as we were, confined to this cave system by geography and biology. They couldn't leave either. They'd found others like themselves, the families that had been trapped here over the years. Some had joined them. Some had died. But all had been given the choice. I asked what happened to the ones who joined them. She said they were still here, still alive, swimming in the deep chambers, changed, adapted, but alive. Learning to breathe water, learning to see in the darkness, learning to sing the old songs. I realized she was describing drowning. She was describing people who'd walked into the water, been pulled under, died, and the creatures had made her believe those people had transformed, had joined them willingly. They'd turned murder into mythology. On day 121, I tied Rebecca to our tent supports while she slept. I used climbing rope from our kayaking gear, secured her hands gently but firmly. She woke and found herself restrained, screamed at me, called me names I'd never heard her use, said I was keeping her from her family, her real family, the ones who understood her. Emma cried. Michael helped me check the knots, making sure his mother couldn't escape but wasn't hurt. I explained that Mom was sick, that the creatures had gotten into her head somehow, that we were keeping her safe until she recovered, but I didn't know if she would recover. The connection they'd formed when she answered. Their singing seemed permanent. Every night, she'd strain against the ropes, humming, singing, trying to reach the water. Every morning, she'd be exhausted, hoarse, slightly more distant from who she'd been before. On day 125, she stopped eating, said she wasn't hungry, didn't need food anymore. I forced her to eat, made her swallow fish and seaweed, watched to make sure she didn't vomit it back up. She tolerated the food, but took no pleasure from it. On day 130, she stopped speaking to us in full sentences, just fragments, single words, mostly water and deep and waiting. She'd stare toward the darker chambers for hours, unblinking. Her skin had taken on a strange pallor, grayish and dull. Her eyes looked sunken, pupils dilated. Emma asked if Mom was dying. I said no. I said she was fighting an infection or illness, something psychological the creatures had triggered. I said she'd get better once we escaped, once we got her to doctors who could help. Michael asked if we should let her go, let her walk into the water, join the creatures, stop fighting. He asked if it would be kinder. I said no, we weren't giving up on her. We were family. We stayed together, but privately, watching Rebecca strain against the ropes, watching her deteriorate mentally and physically. I wondered if he was right. Maybe letting her go would be mercy. Maybe the creatures would keep her alive in whatever way they could. Maybe she'd be happier with them than slowly dying here with us. On day 135, Rebecca stopped struggling. She just lay in the tent, ropes still securing her, staring at nothing. The singing continued every night, but she didn't respond anymore. Didn't hum, didn't smile, didn't react at all. She'd go somewhere inside herself, somewhere we couldn't reach. I untied her on day 140. She didn't try to go to the water, didn't try to escape, just sat at the campsite staring, barely. responsive. I had to feed her, remind her to drink, help her to the bathroom. She was alive but empty, hollowed out. Emma said the creatures had taken her anyway. Even though she hadn't gone into the water, they'd taken her mind, her personality, everything that made her our mother and wife. What remained was just a shell, breathing and existing but not living. I still believed she could recover. I still hoped that if we escaped, if we got her real medical help, she'd come back to us. But hope was becoming harder to maintain. The singing had claimed its first victim, and it hadn't even needed to kill her. On day 147, Emma found the collapsed passage behind the eastern wall of the skylight chamber. She'd been exploring alone, something I'd forbidden, but couldn't prevent anymore. Our family structure had disintegrated. Rebecca was catatonic. Michael spent most of his time sleeping. I was focused on keeping us alive, on maintaining basic survival routines. Emma had retreated into herself, spoke rarely, explored obsessively. She came back to the campsite carrying something wrapped in cloth. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She said I needed to see what she'd found. I needed to see it immediately. I followed her through the passages to the skylight chamber, then to a section of wall I'd examined months ago and dismissed as solid. But Emma had found a gap, maybe 2 feet wide, hidden behind a rock projection. She'd squeezed through, explored beyond. The passage on the other side had collapsed partially, but remained navigable. We crawled maybe 50 feet, Emma leading with a flashlight. The passage opened into a chamber I'd never seen before. And the chamber was filled with belongings, camping equipment from different eras. A canvas tent, rotted and moldy, that looked like it dated from the 1920s or 1930s. Sleeping bags from the 1980s, recognizable by their design and synthetic fabrics. A backpack from the 1950s, leather and corroded metal. Frames, coolers, lanterns, cooking supplies, clothes, shoes, personal items scattered everywhere. Emma had organized some of it. She'd created piles sorted by era, by family group. She showed me a wallet from 1987, containing a driver's license for Daniel Martinez, the same name carved in the main chamber. She showed me a locket from 1947, engraved with initials, a child's toy from the 1960s, a camera from 2003, waterproof, digital, the battery long dead. She'd counted at least 12 different family groups based on the belongings, 12 separate incidents of people trapped here, spanning over a century. Some had been here for days before they died or escaped. Minimal supplies, little evidence of long-term habitation. Others had been here for months, judging by the wear on their equipment and the amount of supplies they'd accumulated. Then Emma showed me the skeletons, 6 complete sets of remains scattered through the chamber. Adults and children, some lying peacefully, as if they'd gone to sleep and never woken. Others in positions suggesting violence, scattered bones, crushed skulls, evidence of trauma. I examined each set of remains carefully. 3 showed no obvious cause of death. 2 had fractured skulls. 1 had been partially dismembered, bones separated and arranged in a pattern that looked deliberate. Not scavenging, not natural decomposition. Something had taken that body apart and laid it out like a specimen, like an experiment. Emma said there was more. She led me to the back of the chamber where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Behind the rubble, another passage, smaller, leading down. She'd explored maybe 20 feet into it before the slope became too steep and she'd turned back. But she'd seen more chambers below, more passages branching off. She'd heard water moving, constant flow, like an underground river. She said she thought the cave system was much larger than we'd realized. The chambers we'd been living in were just the accessible areas, the shallow sections near the entrance. Below us, extending deep into the cliff and probably into the ground, were miles of passages. That's where the creatures lived. That's where they'd been dragging bodies, storing them, studying them. I asked how she knew they'd been studying the bodies. She showed me the skeleton that had been arranged. The bones had been laid out in anatomical position, but separated. Each bone placed carefully, oriented correctly. Someone had disassembled a human body and reconstructed it as a display. And the only things here that could have done that were the creatures. Emma said she'd found writings too. Not carvings like in the main chambers, but writings on paper, on fabric, on any surface victims had been able to mark. Journal entries, notes, desperate messages. She'd collected what was readable, spread them out on a flat rock. I read through them methodically. A diary from 1994 belonging to someone named Catherine Sutton. 15 pages of small handwriting documenting her family's experience. They'd been trapped for 93 days before the diary ended. The final entry said her husband was going to try swimming through the barrier underwater, holding his breath, seeing if he could make it to open ocean before the pain killed him. The diary didn't say if he succeeded. A letter from 1962, written by a man named Thomas Wright to his wife. He'd been camping with his 2 sons when they'd found the caves. They'd been trapped for 6 weeks. He was writing the letter to leave behind, hoping someone would find it and deliver it. He described the creatures, called them sirens and demons. He said one of his sons had answered the singing, had walked into the water, never came back. He said he could hear his son sometimes, singing with the creatures. He said he knew it wasn't really his son anymore. A note from 1978, just 3 sentences. They won't let us leave. They keep us alive. This is hell, Emma had found. 43 separate documents. Some were just single pages, final messages. Others were extensive journals spanning weeks or months. Together, they told the same story we were living. People found the caves, got trapped, tried to survive, either died or disappeared. None of the documents described successful escape. None ended with, "We found a way out." They all just stopped, mid-sentence sometimes, as if the writer had been interrupted and never returned. I asked Emma why she'd spent so much time here, reading these documents, sorting through dead people's belongings. She said because we needed to learn from them. They'd all tried different approaches to escape, different survival strategies, different ways to interact with the creatures. Their failures could teach us what not to do. Their observations could fill gaps in our understanding. She'd been creating a database in her notebook. Every family, how long they'd survived, what had killed them if known, what they'd learned. About the creatures, she'd found patterns. Families that answered the singing typically survived 2 to 4 months after first response, before dying or disappearing. Families that didn't answer averaged 6 to 9 months before dying of starvation or disease. No family had survived more than 14 months based on the available evidence. We were at 4 months and 3 weeks. If the patterns held, we had maybe 4 more months before we died. Less now that Rebecca had answered and was deteriorating. Emma said she'd been looking for evidence that anyone escaped. Any indication that the barrier could be broken, that the creatures could be negotiated with, that survival was possible long-term. She'd found none. Every person who'd entered these caves and stayed long enough to leave evidence had died here. We sat in that chamber of the dead for over an hour, surrounded by belongings that represented lives cut short, families destroyed. Emma showed me photographs from the waterproof camera. The Johnson family smiling at their campsite days before they died here. A young couple from 1995 embracing in front of the cave entrance. Children playing in tidal pools, unaware they'd never leave. I asked Emma if she'd shown Michael any of this. She said no. She said Michael was already giving up, already accepting death. Showing him evidence that no one survives would finish him. She said we had to keep him believing escape was possible, even if we knew it wasn't. I asked if she believed escape was possible. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she used to believe it. When we first got trapped, she'd been certain rescue would come, certain we'd find a way out. Then weeks passed, then months. Now she'd seen proof that dozens of people before us had tried everything we'd tried and failed. She said she was tired. She said she understood why Rebecca had answered the singing, why she'd tried to connect with the creatures, living here, trapped forever, slowly, dying. Maybe joining the creatures was better. Maybe transforming into something else was preferable to staying human and hopeless. I grabbed her shoulders, made her look at me. I told her she couldn't think that way. We were surviving. We were adapting. We were stronger than previous families because we had her intelligence and my scientific training and our determination. We weren't giving up. She asked why not. What was the point of surviving if survival meant years of suffering and darkness? Eating raw fish, watching each other deteriorate. Why was that better than just walking into the water and ending it quickly? I didn't have a good answer. I told her because we were alive, because being alive mattered, because hope remained, even when logic suggested otherwise. I told her because I was her father, and I said so, and that would have to be enough. We returned to the campsite, carrying some of the documents and photographs. Emma had wanted to bring one of the journals, the most detailed one, to study further. I'd said no. Those documents belong to the dead. We leave them in that chamber, respect the victims, not disturb their final messages more than necessary. That night, I told Michael about the chamber, about the evidence that many families had been trapped here before us. He asked how many had escaped. I lied. I said we didn't know for sure, that some of the families might have found ways out and we just didn't have records of it. He didn't believe me. He was 15 now, old enough to recognize lies even when they were meant to protect him. He said we were going to die here. All of us. Rebecca was already gone mentally. Soon the rest of us would follow. I told him no. We were going to survive. We were going to escape. We just needed to be patient. Stay strong. Keep trying. But I didn't believe it anymore either. It's day 173. We've been trapped in the Mermaids' grottos for nearly 6 months. I'm writing this by lantern, light, using the last pages of Emma's notebook, hoping someone finds it eventually. Rebecca died 3 days ago. She stopped breathing in her sleep on day 170. We buried her in the chamber with the other remains, laid her next to the skeleton from 2003. I said words I don't remember. Emma cried. Michael stood silently. We left her wedding ring on her finger, wrapped her in her sleeping bag since we had no other covering. She'd been gone mentally for weeks before her body stopped. The creatures had taken her mind slowly, day by day, until nothing remained but biological function. Then they'd taken that too. Michael is showing signs now. He started humming at night, matching the singing pitch. He doesn't realize he's doing it. When I point it out, he stops, looks confused, says he doesn't remember starting, but every night, the humming returns, soft, unconscious, the same pattern Rebecca showed. Emma says he has maybe 6 weeks before he reaches Rebecca's state. She's been tracking his symptoms in her notebook, comparing them to what she observed in her mother. The progression is identical. First, the conscious recognition of individual voices, then the compulsion to respond, then the mental deterioration. I've tried restraining him like I restrained Rebecca. He breaks free. He's stronger than his mother was, and I'm weaker after 6 months of poor nutrition. I can't stop him from approaching the water, can't keep him from humming, can't prevent what's happening. Emma says we should let him go, walk into the water, join the creatures, end his suffering before it becomes prolonged like Rebecca's. She says keeping him here, watching him deteriorate, is cruelty. She says if it were her, she'd want us to let her go quickly. I won't do it. I won't help my son drown. I won't give the creatures another victim. We survive together or we die together, but I won't surrender him. Yesterday I found a crevice in the rocks near the cave entrance, maybe 6 inches wide, angled toward the ocean. During low tide, water drains through it, flowing out to sea. I realized I could push small objects through. Notes, written records, sealed in waterproof bags. I spent this morning preparing this document. And I've written everything I can remember about our experience, about what trapped us, about the creatures, about how previous families died. I've included Emma's observations, the patterns she identified, the timeline of Rebecca's deterioration. I'm going to seal this in a waterproof bag from our camping supplies, tie it with rope so it won't float away, and push it through the crevice during the next low tide. The current will carry it out to the ocean. Maybe it'll wash ashore somewhere. Maybe someone will find it. If you're reading this, you found it. You're holding the only record that might make it out of these caves. Everyone who's been trapped here has died, or joined the creatures, or vanished into the deep passages. No one escapes. The barrier sees to that. Michael is calling for me. He's at the water's edge again, humming. I need to bring him back, get food into him, keep him alive another day. Emma is in the chamber with the remains, reading the old journals again, looking for anything we missed, any clue that might help. We have maybe 2 months of survival left, based on Emma's calculations, less if Michael deteriorates as quickly as Rebecca did. Our equipment is failing. Tents have holes, sleeping bags are rotting, clothes falling apart. Our bodies are failing too. I've lost probably 40 pounds. Emma has lost 30. Michael has lost 25. We're all showing signs of malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, muscle wasting. The creatures watch us constantly now. They surface every night, float closer each time. Last night, one came within 10 feet of our campsite. It watched us for over an hour, studying, learning. I think they're waiting for us to die naturally, or waiting for us to answer the singing, or waiting for something else I don't understand. Emma found more passages leading down yesterday. She estimates the cave system extends at least half a mile underground, maybe more. She says there are hundreds of chambers we haven't explored, possibly thousands, and all of them are inhabited by the creatures. We're living in the shallow edges of their vast underwater city. I don't know why they keep us here. Food, maybe. They're preserving us like livestock. Study. They're learning about humans through prolonged observation. Companionship. They're lonely and they want others to sing with them. Or something else entirely. Some motivation I can't comprehend because my thinking is too human, too limited. The singing is starting again. It's 8:47 p.m., the same time it starts every night. Michael has stopped calling. He's probably at the water already, humming along. I should go get him, but I'm tired. So tired. It's hard to care anymore about maintaining routines, about enforcing rules, about surviving. Emma just came back from the remains chamber. She says she found another journal we missed before, wedged under rocks. From 1956, a family that survived for 11 months. The father had been a doctor. He documented everything medically, nutritionally, psychologically. Emma says his observations confirm her timeline. We have maybe 8 weeks left before total system failure. She's going to read the entire journal tonight, extract any useful information. I'm going to seal this document and push it through the crevice at tomorrow's low tide. Then I'm going to try one more time to break through the barrier. One final attempt, using every bit of strength I have left. Maybe if I'm willing to die in the attempt, the barrier will let me through. Maybe sacrifice is the key. If it works, I'll send help. If it doesn't, this document will be all that's left of our family. To whoever finds this, don't look for us. Don't try to rescue us. By the time you read this, we'll be long dead. Don't explore the mermaids' grottos. Don't enter sea caves along this stretch of coast. Don't investigate if you hear singing coming from the water. The creatures are real. The barrier is real. The trap is real. And it's been here for at least a century, probably longer, catching people, keeping them, studying them. Dozens have died here, maybe hundreds over the years, before record keeping, before anyone documented these deaths. Our names are David Chen, Rebecca Chen, Emma Chen, and Michael Chen. We were from Portland, Oregon. We entered the Mermaids grottos on July 14th, 2019, planning to stay for one night. We never left. If you're reading this, learn from us. Stay away from these caves. The singing you hear isn't beautiful. It's predatory. The creatures aren't curious. They're collecting specimens. The barrier isn't natural. It's a trap. This is my last entry. Tomorrow I attempt the barrier one final time. Tomorrow Emma will seal her notebook with her observations and push it through the crevice too. Tomorrow Michael might walk into the water and we'll lose him like we lost Rebecca. Or tomorrow might be the same as today. Slow deterioration, diminishing hope, survival without purpose. Either way, our story ends here. In darkness, in hunger, in caves that sing with voices that aren't human. Don't follow us. Don't investigate. Don't let curiosity bring you to these rocks. The mermaids aren't what the legends say. They're worse. And they're waiting